Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to pass you over to Eric, who is our host this evening.
Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, good afternoon from Europe, good morning to those who are watching us in United States. Firstly, truly, shortly, I'm so glad that we can meet with you, students involved in Graduate Academy. So first, I would like to thank Malvina Garriga, Alina, and Olga for opportunity to talk online with you. I have a pleasure to kindly welcome the lecturers, Professor Julia Lamy and Professor Marek Kornat. But before we start, as you probably heard, we are running a quite large project dedicated to research on genocide and totalitarianism. This area covers discussion in many disciplines: history, law, sociology, psychology, including even traumatology. For what? Because the concept invented by Rafał Lemkin, Polish jurist, Polish lawyer, has gained unbelievable power. For example, for tragic example, we hear it every day in the context of the war in Ukraine. Tragic fact of the aggressive war conducted by Russia, which attacked Ukraine by armed forces. It is an obvious fact and an obvious threat to the lives of hundreds of thousands of people. Suddenly, here in Europe, we woke up 4 weeks ago with a war on the border, with everyday images of various crimes. Ukraine is a country in Europe. Ukraine is a partner, not a member, but partner of European Union, country which was attacked by Russian armed forces, by the state with nuclear power, by member of the United Nations Security Council, by the state that has chosen aggressive war as a language of international relation in the 21st century. And this is also the fact. Until now, for specialists like us, it has been rather an academic, historical problem connected with Second World War or with genocides in Rwanda or Srebrenica during the war in the former Yugoslavia. By the way, Pileckiego Institute have already established the Rafał Lemkin Center for documenting Russian crimes in Ukraine. We call it shortly Lemkin Center. But today we will listen to lecturers, to presentation about the Soviet genocides, about the Soviet crimes of Stalin's time. First of all, and it's quite important, genocide is not only a mass crime, but above all, it is a crime of intent. It is a prepared crime, a crime as a result of cold politics, called inhuman and anti-human calculation. The most important feature is the intention, some will, some intention to destroy whole nation or whole group. In Stalinist Russia, genocide has become an idea, some kind of idea, some idea for social engineering, one of techniques of totalitarian rule. Today, we will listen lectures by two excellent specialists from Italy and Poland. First, we will start with the lecture by Professor Lamy. Both speakers have around the 30 minutes of time, and after that will be a moment for discussion, for questions. I am inviting you to ask questions even now. This is quite easy. This can be done via Q&A or chat, up to you. Please write at any time. and you got some bias. So let me remind you quite briefly. And Giulia Lamy is a full professor of history of Eastern Europe at the University of Milan. She's a member of various Italian and international scientific associations. Her publication concerned the history and historiography of Central Eastern Europe in the modern contemporary era. Professor Lamy, grazie mille per la tua presenza, and the floor is yours.
Grazie. Dobry wieczór dla wszystkim z Mediolanu. My lecture is about Rafał Lemkin, the genocide and the Ukrainian case. I would like to explain some biographical notes about Lemkin that, in my opinion, are important to understand his choices in life. Lemkin was born a Russian subject. In 1900 in the locality of Bezvodne, near Volkovisk, about 80 kilometers from Białystok, in then Eastern Poland, at the time Russian. In a Jewish family where the father was a farmer and the mother instead had philosophical interests and linguistics that she passed on to his son. It is no coincidence that he initially enrolled at Jan Kazimierz University of Lviv, then Lwów in Poland, to study linguistics. I remember that he spoke 9 languages before turning to law studies. This conversion, which then led him to become a jurist, otherwise directing his life, is due to a first encounter with the problem of genocide. In Berlin, as you know, in 1921, the former Ottoman Interior Minister, Mehmed Talat, was killed by Sogomon Terliyan, a young Armenian whose family had been exterminated. Lemkin was struck by the event also because it seemed unbearable to him that in the absence of a law capable of punishing a state that perpetrated criminal acts, it was an individual who took charge of the punishment, going so far as to become a murderer. And studying this problem became his life goal. We all know his exceptional contribution to the history of the 20th century with the battle for the international recognition of a crime of genocide, a term of which he has a paternity since 1944, when he wrote his important work, Axis Rule in Occupied Europe, published that year in the United States. And here I will share my screen with you because I would like do you see?
Yes, we can.
Okay, this is Dr. Rafał Lemkin standing far right. When the Convention on Genocide underwent ratification 14 October 1950, because it was a long process to submit it to all countries involved. Precisely, In Lemkin unpublished papers, a writing entitled The Soviet Genocide was found, where Lemkin pronounces himself extensively in favor of the thesis of a genocide of Ukrainians of Ukrainian Socialist Republic in the 30s, not only thinking of peasants starving to death, but also thinking of the decimation of national, political, cultural, and religious Ukrainian elites. I am convinced that his training in Lviv, the capital of former Eastern Galicia, now in the western part of Ukraine, led him to take an especially empathetic interest in the Ukrainian case, on which, as is well known, a heavy silence had fallen. Now, I would like to look at what Lemkin writes about Ukraine. This is an essay based on the intervention prepared on the occasion of the commemoration of the Great Famine by the Ukrainian community in New York in 1953, and which was found among Lemkin's papers kept in the New York Public Library. As the Ukrainian-Canadian historian Roman Serbin, who edited its publication, points out, it was one of the first writings of a non-Ukrainian on this subject. Great Famine, now known as Holodomor, by Alexa Mushenko, 1980s. Holodomor, moriti holodom, oppressed by hunger, inflict starvation, execute by starvation. The Holodomor is the Ukrainian genocide. This was the conference he gave in New York. You see well, or I have to enlarge? The exergo added in pencil is already significant. He quotes Volodymyr Soshura poem Love Ukraine, 1944. You cannot love other peoples unless you love Ukraine. The opening words are very strong. The mass murder of peoples and of nations that has characterized the advance of the Soviet Union into Europe is not a new feature of their policy of expansionism. It is indeed an indispensable step in the process of union that the Soviet leaders fondly hope will produce the Soviet man and the Soviet nation. And to achieve that goal, that unified nation, the leaders in Kremlin will gladly destroy the nations and the cultures that have long inhabited Eastern Europe. This is a very strong opening. This is Soshura. In the opinion of Lemkin, there is a Tsarist Soviet continuity. He remembers the Crimean Tatars deported by order of Catherine the Great, the murders of Ivan the Terrible's SS troops, the Oprichnina, the execution of national Polish leaders and Ukrainian Catholics by Nicholas I, and the many Jewish pogroms that have stained Russian history periodically. And it matches also our fact, the annihilation of in Cuban Cossacks, Crimean Tatar republics, the Baltic nation, Estonia, Latvia. Each is a case in the long-term policy of liquidation of non-Russian peoples by the removal of select part. This idea of select part is very important in Lemkin's thought. Why Ukraine? Lemkin explains the geographical position of Ukraine is characteristic, concluding that the Russification of this member of the Union was needed because the Ukrainian was never a Russian by culture, temperament, language, and religion. Ukraine thus lent itself to selective racial murder. The nation was too populous to be completely effectively exterminated. However, and I quote Lemkin, its leadership, religious, intellectual, political, its select and the determining parts are quite small and therefore easily eliminated. And so it is upon this group particularly that the full force of the Soviet axe has fallen with its familiar tools of mass murder, deportation, enforced labor, exile, and starvation. And he reiterates, we don't proceed to the unity of a nation through the destruction of the others. Here lies the unacceptability of the Soviet model. In main points of the Soviet genocide in Ukraine, you can read. What I want to speak about is perhaps the classic example of Soviet genocide, its longest and broadest experiment in Russification, the destruction of the Ukrainian nation. And Soviet, but he used the word Russification. It is a case of genocide, of the destruction, not of individuals only, but of a culture and a nation. Four-pronged attack on the Ukrainian nation, I resume. The first blow is aimed at the intelligentsia, the national brain, as to paralyze the rest of the body. After churches, that is to say, the soul of Ukraine, Russification was the only issue. Church was offered the opportunity to join the Russian Patriarchate at Moscow, but no more. These attacks on the soul have also had and will continue to have a serious effect on the brain of Ukraine, for it is the families of clergy that have traditionally supplied a large part of the intellectuals. The third prong is aimed at the farmers. Why? Because the independent peasants are the repository of the tradition, folklore, music, national language and literature, national spirit of Ukraine. The weapon is the most terrible, starvation. It's not only a problem to eliminate the kulaks, because in the word of Kozior, Ukrainian nationalism is our chief danger. And it was necessary to eliminate that nationalism. The first step in the process consisted in the fragmentation of Ukrainian people at once, by the addition to the Ukraine of foreign peoples and by the dispersion of the Ukrainians throughout Eastern Europe. In this way, ethnic unity would be destroyed and nationalities mixed, famine and deportation. So if we wanted to see at the conceptualization of Ukrainian genocide done by Lemkin, as was explained by Roman Serbin, first, the notion of Ukrainian genocide is expanded from starving the Ukrainian peasants to destroying the Ukrainian nation. Second, an integrated genocide, because it's directed toward distinct sectors of Ukrainian population. Third, he places the genocidal process in the long duration history, where some events occurred concurrently and other consecutively. Third, genocidal policies targeted two overlapping Ukrainian groups: national, Ukrainian Socialist Republic, and ethnic, Ukrainian Socialist Republic. If we look at the Convention on the Prevention and Punishment of a Crime of Genocide, you can have a look to the slide. You can find all the elements in order to qualify what happened in Ukraine as a genocide. My conclusion. I want to emphasize that Lemkin's analysis broadens the notion of Ukrainian genocide from starving the Ukrainian peasant, as said by Roman Serbin, to destroying the Ukrainian nation, looking at the period 1926-1946. The Ukrainian case for Lemkin is a genocide and falls within the cases envisaged by the Convention. Furthermore, this analysis, with its attention to the persecution of intelligentsia since the 20s on several occasions up to the end of Second World War, of the Church, autocephalous before the war, Greek Catholic afterwards, and ethnic engineering highlights really a process that is not possible to liquidate in 2 words. The Ukrainian case, moreover, is emblematic for understanding the dynamics of those supranational formations that were the Tsarist and Soviet empires. In short, a vast field for historical research that Lemkin already invited to identify 69 years ago. And today we are speaking about a new attack from Russia to Ukraine, and to selected part of Ukraine, because at first the idea of Russian leadership is, if you remember, was to destroy Zelensky, the Ukrainian government, and also the policy against the municipality, the chief of regions or municipality is aimed to fire, to eliminate the brain, the guide of that nation, so that you can control the rest of the population after the migration and even the deportation. Thank you very much for your attention.
Professor Lamy, grazie mille. Thank you very much. It's a really great pleasure. Right now, we will have a presentation by Professor Marek Kornat. Professor Marek Kornat, it will be short introduction, is a Sovietologist and researcher of 19th and 20th century Polish political science. He is also the head of section of the history of diplomacy and totalitarian systems at the Polish Academy of Science and the lecturer at the Cardinal Stefan Wyszyński University in Warsaw. He has received many awards for his historical publication and books. Professor Kornat is one of permanent member our Lemkin's project, and will present a broader view of Stalin's genocide. Professor Kornat, the floor is yours.
Ladies and gentlemen, I will be speaking generally on the Soviet Union, in the interwar era, and this is the formation period for the Soviet state, and this is the very important time for the comprehension of the nature of communist regime in this country, which was established in 1917 after Lenin's upheaval in Petrograd in Russia during the First World War. First of all, I think it should be reminded that the history of the Soviet Union between 1917 and 1939 is the history of the mass violence. Is the history of mass violence. Mass violence is the principal factor of the rule of the governing in this country during these years. I use this term mass violence in the connection of the definition which was made by French professor and expert in the genocide questions, Jacques Semelin. In 1917, we had Lenin's upheaval, as I mentioned, but this is only a starting point for the construction of the first totalitarian regime in the world. The Soviet Union was the first totalitarian regime in the world. I will introduce some periodization proposals, which probably are not too inventory, but I think that it could be useful to use them in the talk, in the discussion of today. First of all, we have the eruption of mass violence during the civil war in Russia. And during this time, between 1917 and 1920, many war crimes were perpetrated. Civil war in Russia is very bloody period of the Soviet Union in the Soviet Union history, in the Soviet Union's history. The next point of my short presentation, it is the general remark on NEP, new economic policy, which was promoted by Lenin initially in 1921. It is the period which is considered in historiography generally as a time of détente and as a time of some kind of peaceful methods of government in the Soviet Union. And I think that these historians who are connected with this conception are generally wrong. During the NEP period, between 1921 and 1929, we have mass persecution of the religion, especially of the religion in the Soviet Union. We had also many other crimes concerning many nations, especially mass deportations, etc. And in the years 1929 and 1939, we had two processes which are constitutive for the Soviet Union. I mean, a great process of the mass collectivization, the industrialization. And second process, it was the great terror, the great Stalinist terror against army, against administration, against party functionaries, etc. And many national, so to say, persecutions, especially persecutions against the Polish society in the Soviet Union. I mean, so-called Polish operation, Operacja Polska of the NKWD in the last 30s, between 37 and 38. When we are discussing the problem of the Soviet collectivization of the agriculture, we must remember that it signified the destruction of the the biggest social class in Russia, in the Soviet Union. I mean, peasants. This was mass persecution and liquidation of the social class, and it was absolutely corresponding with the Lemkin's idea of genocide. I mean, especially especially his conception of mass violence, which was exposed in the communication to the Madrid conference in 1933, when he proposed his initial conceptions concerning new crimes. It is true, as Professor Lamy said, that the mass collectivization produced the great famine in Ukraine, and of course famine in many different regions of the Soviet Union. Ukrainian Holodomor or famine is the best example of the extermination of the nation. It is not an accident. It is not an product of Soviet economic policy, but it is exterminational policy directed against Ukrainian nation, and it absolutely must be associated with the idea of genocide in the Lemkin's definition. Let me say some words in my rather short communication about the crimes against peace. The Soviet Union was also engaged in the crimes against peace. The Soviet Union was not a peaceful country which wanted collective security in Europe, as Soviet propaganda and Russian propaganda argued today. The Soviet Union wanted to expand. The expansion was the main idea of the regime, and especially the Soviet Union wanted to reincorporate all these territories which were lost after the collapse of the Russian Empire during the First World War and Revolution and Civil War and war against Poland in 1919-1920. And also the Soviet Union wanted to enter to the Eastern and Central Europe to establish zone of interest, own zone of interest of the Soviet Union in the Central Europe, especially, I mean, Poland and Baltic states and Romania, of course, and Czechoslovakia. And this was the reason that the Soviet Union in 1939 conducted parallel negotiations between the Western powers and also Germany. And finally, the choice was made, and the Soviet government decided to conclude the well-known Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact, which was a crime against peace. A crime against peace. Crimes against peace are defined in the international public law. The most important factor, I think, when we are discussing the Soviet policy in the eve of the Second World War, it was the idea of occupation, the idea of expansion and extermination of different nations. Soviet policy on the territories of the Eastern Poland, which were occupied after September 17, 1939, it was a laboratory of Soviet exterminatory policy, which was conducted and promoted. This was mass deportations, first of all. These were mass deportations, mass killings, extermination of the prisoners of war, etc. And for instance, the execution of the Polish prisoners of war, Polish officers of Polish army, it is not only a war crime, but also a crime against humanity and also an example of genocide, because it was perpetrated due to the Soviet conviction, Soviet leaders' conviction that the extermination of the elites is a conditio sine qua non of the Sovietization of Polish nation. The elimination of the elites, intellectual and political, etc. In conclusion, I think that Soviet Union is the best example for free definitions of the crimes of the new type. First of all, it was the example of war crimes, especially in war against Poland, 1919, 1920, or during the civil war in Russia between 1917 and 1920, and in 1939, after invasion of Poland. Secondly, we have crimes against humanity. The best example is the Soviet policy in the eve of war and cooperation with Germany against peace, against the international order, and Ribbentrop-Molotov Pact is the significant factor for this constatation. And last but not least, we have genocide in Lemkin's, in correspondence with Lemkin's definition. I mean, especially Great Famine in Ukraine and extermination of the peasants in Russia during the mass collectivization. Mass collectivization was highly terrible and violent period in the Soviet history. It was recognized not only by Sovietologists, foreign Sovietologists, but also in Soviet historiography in the Gorbachev era, when some kind of historical revision appeared possible. And concerning Ukraine, it is very important not to neglect that Great Famine was not one of the many famines which took place in this time in Soviet Empire, but it was the greatest famine which was a product of Soviet exterminatory policy against Ukrainian nation. Thank you very much.
Professor Kornat, thank you very much for your presentation, for your lecture. Right now, we still have a few minutes for short discussion. We're still waiting for the questions. Feel free to ask us about any aspect of the presentation, any aspect of genocide in former Soviet Union or in some present aspect. Just ask us. Undoubtedly, I have one or two questions to our lecturers. Primary, my basic problem, basic question: what was the reason? And this is the question to our both lecturers, both professors. What was the reason for the fact that the world public opinion was so passive, so blind to Soviet crimes? Did the world know what was happening in Ukraine in 1930s? And this is the question to Professor Lamy and Professor Kornat. And I have one or two more questions, but I will be grateful for answer for this first one.
This is a very heavy question, because as far as I am concerned, I have to say that the problem of public opinion about Holodomor is not the problem of the 30s, it's also the problem of the present. Because I remember that when I discovered in the limits of my possibilities, the opinion of Lemkin, and I started to see the collectivization in Ukraine in terms of voluntary extermination, I found a lot of problem in public debates. Not only in Russia. I remember once when was possible to speak about such matters, but also in Italy or in France. I was contacted by a French historian who said that the Lemkin's convention didn't speak about precisely a genocide by starvation. And I noticed that the essential studies of conquest, for instance, was published with great difficulties in Italy, and only in the 80s, and only by a publishing house belonging to the liberal right, we can say. Because the Communist Party in Italy accepted only part of the truth. The only part according with the ideas of Eurocommunism, but not forward. So even the Stalinist period was something not well received. And of course, nobody in Italy knew about this problem from the newspaper or from the general journals. So even now, when I have to speak about Ukraine, I notice that the public doesn't know the word Holodomor. Something happened, but it was the Soviet collectivization. We know that it was a great crime, but Serbin explained very well, and Lemkin explained very well that there was an artificial will in obtain that result. So I think that there was around the Soviet Union an ideological net of protection. There is also around Russia. And we know that the pro-Putin, in a certain way, are counting in influencing in a subtle way the public opinion, even in this moment. The difference is that Soviet Union was the center of a universal globalist idea. Russia nowadays is representing only itself. So probably is lighter to criticize Russia, but is still difficult to criticize the old Soviet Union. And this is a paradox of our public opinions.
Thank you very much. It's quite important. Same question to Professor Marek Kornat, but I see that we have a few questions on Q&A. I hope you have access. I mean, at Professor Kornat and Julia, because it's open to read it in a Q&A panel. So I will back to my question to Professor Kornat, but also I will read it after it, some of the question from Q&A, but if just you found any question as interesting, just answer it,
Yeah, thank you very much for the question. I will try to limit myself in generally 2 or 3 points. First of all, I think that it should be mentioned one thing of great importance. I mean the conceptions of progressivity in the social regimes, in policy, in the world. And Soviet communist regime was considered as a progressive one, as a progressive force in the world. And all these crimes on which the people in the West had informations, these all crimes were considered as a necessary price for progress. Collectivization is a good idea. Of course, it signified some sufferings of the people, but it is the coronation of the great idea of communist society or socialist society. I mean, this idea of progressivity, it was, of course, not so popular in the conservative circles in Paris, London, Washington, etc. But in the liberal centers and especially socialists, it was very significant and popular. We can mention only a rare phenomenon of 1930s, I mean some kind of ideological pilgrims. Ideologiczni pielgrzymi in Polish, we can say, to Russia. I use this formula of American scholar Professor Paul Hollander, ideological pilgrims. He enumerated many Western intellectuals which arrived to Russia. They visited this country and they left this country saying that all is very, very good. That all accusations are the product of intelligence of Poland, Germany, or Japan, and that the Soviet Union is in better condition in comparison with all these informations which were in function before their arrival to this country. And last but not least, this will be point number 3. After Hitler's establishment of the National Socialist regime in Germany, and after the starting of aggressive policy of the Third Reich of Germany, I mean especially such moves like mass armaments, which were started in 1935, remilitarization of the Rhineland in 1936, etc. It appeared many people in the West who argued that the Soviet Union is the unique force which can be the partner for the Western powers against Germany. I can mention only one very famous name, I mean Winston Churchill. Winston Churchill was a person who had no pro-communist illusions. He was a conservative, great figure of European politics. But initially in 1935, he proposed the idea of three-party pact: Paris, London, and Moscow against Germany. And he said that so-called collective security is impossible because many countries, especially Poland, is not interested in this idea. But Soviet Union should be our partner, and this signified some kind of silence against crimes. Of course, this is not so simple to say. Many leaders in the West, especially Prime Minister Chamberlain, was against contacts with the Soviet Union. However, he had to change his views, his tactics in spring 1939. But this is the other story for the other discussion. These all people, these all statesmen in the West who were against cooperation with the Soviet Union, these people, these statesmen were the promoters of the appeasement policy. This is another story, and for Poland it was most dangerous in this time. But generally, I think that progressivity and the idea of Soviet Union as a necessary, unique partner against Germany. These were two reasons of the weak response of the free world against genocidal and exterminatory policy, internal policy in the Soviet Union.
Professor Kornat, thank you very much. At the beginning, I was truly worried if you would have some questions, and right now I see many of them. So here it's going to be a quite big discussion. I will try to read it, some of them. Can you explain your meaning of the term totalitarian? And second one, in connection, are not all imperial powers totalitarian. Many have committed genocides, and short answers from me, and of course I ask about the answer also our lecturers. Yes, undoubtedly you're right. I mean, not all imperial powers, not even all totalitarian regimes are genocide regimes or states. It's not so simple connections between it. It's easy to show, especially Rwanda is one of examples. Same is with Srebrenica, that some of the countries could proceed genocidal policy or genocidal actions, genocidal crimes, without the totalitarian background. And according to first part of this question, what we understanding under the term of totalitarian, it's quite easy answer from perspective of our team, our project, because very important and quite big part of our research according to genocide and totalitarian regimes is around the term and definition of totalitarian and totalitarianism, according to definition and to theory of Karl Friedrich, Zbigniew Brzeziński, and partly, of course, Hannah Arendt. And this is the part of my answer. Of course, I will be grateful for any addition from Professor Kornat. But I will read it, the question for our lecturers. Next question. Do you think that Soviet methods of governing affected the violent methods which Russian government is using right now in a war against Ukraine? Mm-hmm. If yes, then to which extent? Thank you for your answer. And I will be also grateful for answer both from Professor Kornat and Professor Lamy, because it's quite important question and problem right now.
But I can add something about the pilgrims, the pilgrimage, because the very strange thing is that, okay, we can say that for many Soviet Union was an example of progress. If we read Carr, for instance, Edward Carr.
Edward Carr.
Carr, he said, okay, there was the collectivization or the industrialization, there was a toll to pay, okay, there was some violence, but we had electrification, industrialization, progress, and so on. But apart from this typical how do you say, economicistic view of the expansion of the communist model, is astonishing Mussolini in Italy. Mussolini, theoretically, was a former socialist, but was also anti-communist in the rising of his ideology. We discuss if fascism was totalitarian or not. He had some totalitarian dreams, but Italy was too articulated in order to allow a very totalitarian experiment. Nevertheless, we know from the letter from Kharkiv, written by our diplomats, describing the Great Famine, that Mussolini received directly these letters, signed commented, but never, never, never spoke about this item. It was a powerful tool, if you want, for propaganda. He used a large set of tools for propaganda, but he never touched the problem of the Great Famine. And why? Because nevertheless, there was the interest in the Russian, the Soviet power, the Soviet economy, the Soviet balance in Europe in order to delay the choice of engagement. And Italy played the two dictators through the 30s and decided very only in 40, we know, after the clashing of the war, to stay with Hitler. So there was a big part of calculation, because anyway, I think that is an idea, a typical Schmittian idea, if you want, that each country has an area of influence. And you leave this area of influence just there. Only in the moment of agreements of alliance, you have to choose which bloc is more powerful for your aims. So the question about the 30s is very, very complicated by many factors relating also to the military ideology of the time, in my opinion. And totalitarian regime are something very special. It's difficult to distinguish between a so-called totalitarian regime or a dictatorial regime with pretension to totalitarianism, or fully totalitarian Weltanschauung. So I think that is a hard problem to discuss, because for instance, China, where we put China today, in which box we want to put China. For the moment, she's only interested in business. But after, when it will display its powerful position in Asia, with a Russia very feeble from a certain point of view. I think that we have to discuss a lot about this after war, because the order in international relationship changed in a very heavy manner. And my colleague Marek Kornat knows better than me that we have to rethink many things. For instance, just to suggest a problem, the hybrid war fits with our international convention. There is also an hybrid law about the hybrid war, but we see examples of hybrid war in Donbass, in Crimea, just two examples. And we have to rethink a lot of problems, in my opinion.
Professor Lamy, thank you very much. It's quite important remarks, especially according to the gap of international law in relation to hybrid war and many of methods which are used today, and not only during this war, but especially right now. But we observe it from the beginning in 2014. But same question to Professor Kornat about the affecting of present war by the methods of Soviet totalitarian type of the war, type of the policy, type of the leading the aggression. I will be grateful for your answer.
Yes, but it was also a question concerning the totalitarianism.
Yeah, sure.
Yes? I will shortly respond. I think that in our days there is a dangerous conception to eliminate the notion of totalitarianism and to replace it by some notions like authoritarianism or dictatorial regimes, etc. Especially our German friends, German historians are engaged in this conception. But in my opinion, there is absolutely necessary to use the notion of totalitarianism because it is absolutely impossible to understand the nature, the character of dictatorship, for instance, of Marshal Piłsudski in Poland, Kemal in Turkey, Mussolini in Italy, Hitler in Germany, etc. When we say that these all dictators were dictators, there is nothing is showed. In my opinion, it should be totalitarian notion should be notion of totalitarianism should be in function, and my position is not too sophisticated. I think that these systematic proposal of Karl Friedrich and Zbigniew Brzeziński should be enforced. I mean, especially the definition saying that it requires a regime of monopoly of one party, mass terror, official propaganda, of course, no political pluralism, monopoly of the party for mass media, etc. And I think that this is only a proposal for discussion. The book of Brzeziński and Friedrich were only a proposal for discussion, but only one thing should be added. I mean, the proposal of Polish historian of ideas, Andrzej Walicki, who argued that totalitarianism is a process. Totalitarianism is not established one day. It is a process, and we can also take into account the process of detotalitarianization, so to say. Detotalitarianization, the internal so to say, internal changes, especially in the Soviet Union. It appeared possible during Khrushchev era or Gorbachev perestroika. The Soviet Union was under the process of detotalitarianization. And this is these are my remarks concerning the idea of totalitarianism, which was initially Italian conception in the interwar era. It was in Italy in use, and after some years it was promoted in the Anglo-Saxon academic world during the Second World War, and especially after the war, when Hannah Arendt published her book, I mean, The Origins of Totalitarianism. And now, responding to the second question, I think that Soviet Union disappeared, of course, from the map of Europe, but Russia of today is a post-Soviet country, but rather I think it is neo-Soviet country, neo-Soviet. Soviet ideology, especially geopolitical conceptions, are still in function, in progress in the Soviet Union. In Russia, of course, Soviet Union, the past of the Soviet Union is still a topic of official discourse on history. On history, we can evoke many different enunciations of the dictator of Russia. And Russia wanted actually to conquer Ukraine, to eliminate Ukraine as an independent country. And Russia is perpetrating many war crimes and crimes against humanity. When we took into account, for instance, Mariupol, the destruction of this city, it is a significant argument for the thesis that Russian policy is a policy of extermination, mass violence, and war crimes, and crimes against humanity. The war against Ukraine is highly impossible to imagine in any different context. It was unprovoked. No ultimatum was notified to Ukrainian government. It was aggression without any kind of attempt to negotiate, etc. And I think that all majority, not all, but majority of methods of Russia in war against Ukraine is Soviet, however, under the name of Russian national interest. Under the name of Russian national interest, but these are Soviet methods, typically Soviet methods. Post-Soviet Russia is governed by the elites of KGB, of intelligence, KGB, secret services. And this is not without the matter for our discussion. The xenophobia in Russian propaganda against the West is typical, is visible, actually, and it corresponds with the Soviet experience. In the Soviet experience, when in the Soviet Union we had many mass propaganda campaigns against the United States, against the West, it is very similar to the propaganda of Russia today. And I think that the idea, I will repeat, the idea is to rebuild Russia as a great power, to receive great power status, superpower status, but methods are typically.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much for your answer. We have many other questions. I will read it, 2 or 3 of them, and probably we will be close to the finish. But first, Vitaly Mazurenko, this is the question for Professor Lamy. To Professor Lamy, can we talk about the Holodomor as a special type of genocide, because it was against, not just against human right to life, but at the same time against human right to a property, as a possibility of individuals defend against oppression of Soviet Russian occupation. What do you think about it?
Of course, I think that we can say so. The problem is that private property is a human right recognized everywhere. It's not so. For instance, in the Soviet Union, the private property was not recognized as a right related to the individual. And we had, I don't know how do you say in English, but we had a selective terror against the private owners, about the clergy, about all the strata of the old society. And also when Western Ukraine was reconnected to the socialist Ukraine, a lot of epuration went on because it was a capitalist country, because during the Polish rule developed a normal society with a lot of strata, with burghers, no? With private, with owners and so on. And we can extend this category. Nevertheless, the problem is not the right of private property. This is a problem into a bigger problem, in my opinion. And the ideological concept of Bolshevik communism, which wanted to eliminate private property. But anyway, in fact, this politics was against everybody for a reason or another. And so you can speak about totalitarianism in a certain way.
Professor Lamy, thank you very much. I would like to add that this question is a great illustration of many years of our project, because during our project we discuss many definitions from many fields. I mean, it's, for example, some of definition, I counted over 25 of definition of genocide in many different disciplines. I mean, it's in history, sociology, many others. And usually we have quite a big problem between the legal definition, strictly from convention, and between some of sociological, historical. They have undoubtedly they have many values, because other definition sometimes have a quite big impact to doctrine, especially to present doctrine, to understanding some of the crimes. But in my opinion, this question is a simple question about the war crimes, and undoubtedly right now we have from the first day of Russian invasion to Ukraine, we have many examples of cruel war crimes, because it's obvious fact, especially during the attack to private property. It's undoubtedly war crimes if it's not military target. And I just wanted to invite some of our participants to to be close to our project. I mean, it's Lemkin's project, because some of our lectures, some of our seminars are wide open to auditory. So some of the problems undoubtedly will appear in the future. Some of them are already solved during our earlier conversation, our earlier meetings. But we have a few more questions. One of them is strictly to Professor Kornat. Would you agree that a workable definition of genocide is the removal of unwanted population by any means, including but not limited to extermination? It's, in my opinion, is quite the same problem like with earlier question, but I will be grateful for answer.
Yes, absolutely. I can agree with this remark. I think we have genocidal motives, for instance, in German Nazi policies during the war. I mean, the extermination of Jewish population in Europe and in Soviet genocidal policy. We have conceptions of liquidation of gulags, for instance, liquidation of gulags as a class. These are words not mine, but Stalin. During the session of Politburo, Stalin said that the liquidation of the gulags as a social class is absolutely necessary. And when we are speaking on Ukrainian nation, it is situation of double dimension. I mean that Soviet architects of the genocidal policy wanted to eliminate Ukrainian peasants and also to weaken Ukrainian nation. You must take into account that before the mass collectivization, Soviet leaders in Moscow feared Ukrainian separatism and especially strong national feeling in Ukraine. I noted this question after the reading of Soviet documents for international policy of the last years in 1920s, before the initial decision of the mass collectivization. Thank you very much.
And last question to both of you. Do you think is it time now to seek broader recognition of Holodomor or other Stalinist genocidal crimes in the West?
Yes, of course, it's time. I remember a Polish-Italian scholar, Victor Zaslavsky, for instance, who wrote about ethnic cleanliness and social cleanliness. He wrote about cutting. What was cutting? Cutting was the liquidation of a Polish elite. And why? Because if you want to possess a country, you have to be sure that nobody can fight you. So in my opinion, personal opinion, the problem with the Ukrainian peasants was that during the civil war, or before, even before civil war, in the period of Ukrainian independence, when there was the Ukrainian Popular Republic, led by Vinichenko and Petliura and so on, there was also a Makhnovist anarchic movement of 2 millions of peasants able to engage, armed fight. So this ghost of a possible peasant resistance played a role in the liquidation, in the way of liquidation chosen by Stalin, because with Ukraine, nothing was an accident. Everything was planned. But why? Why the Ukrainian peasant was dangerous? Because he had given proof to be ready to take a weapon to fight. This is also the problem. And in my opinion, the situation in Russia is worse now because the story is a longer process and it leaves a memory. If you want to recollect the memories of all the points of violence, all the points of power, okay, you have to choose between Ivan the Terrible and Stalin, and you can have a lot of arguments in order to develop a new form of totalitarianism. In my opinion, the project of Putin is we take our national history and we see it only through the moments in which Russia was powerful, was hard, was without mercy for the others, and was more powerful than West. This is a choice. It's an hyper-Slavophile conservative view, a Machtpolitik. Probably the Russian culture contains much more than Machtpolitics. But Putin has chosen this key into the national history. As Mussolini rediscovered the Roman Empire. Okay.
Professor Lamy, thank you very much. One short sentence, Professor Kornat, and probably we will finish.
Yes, if I well understand your question, I think this is your idea that we have problems in the West in recognition of the genocidal character of Great Famine in Ukraine. Yes, I must agree, and I think that in comparison with the Turkish genocide against Armenians, the situation concerning Ukraine genocide is neglected, is considered as problematic in the Western historiography, in Western Europe, etc. But I hope that actual unprovoked war against Ukraine may produce better conditions for the comprehension of the genocidal experience of Ukrainian people in 30s. And this is my idea for the future. The climate can be better because Russia actually is not a partner. Russia is not a partner for the West.
Yes.
Thank you very much. So once again, I would like to express gratitude to Malvina, Gerga, Alina, and Olga for this great opportunity to meet online with you participants of Graduate Academy. Thank you very much to our great lecturers, to Julia Lamy and Marek Kornat, but also I would like to thank you, students of Graduate Academy, and all guests for your time and participation. Have a good day, and I will see you later, I hope so. Bye-bye. See you soon.
Thank you very much.
Dziękuję bardzo.
Grazie, grazie mille.
Grazie.